In 2012, archaeologists were scraping residue off broken pottery in Poland when they found something nobody expected. The shards were 7,500 years old, and the residue wasn't from cooking meat or brewing grain. It was cheese, specifically, the fatty acids left behind when someone strained milk curds through a ceramic sieve thousands of years before the pyramids existed. These people were making cheese before the wheel was invented. But here's what makes it stranger. Humans weren't even supposed to be able to drink milk. See, every mammal on Earth is born with the ability to digest milk, and every single one loses that ability after weaning. That's how it works. Your body produces an enzyme called lactase, it breaks down lactose, and once you stop nursing, production shuts off. Done. You're not meant to keep drinking milk from anything, especially not from a completely different species. And yet, somewhere around 10,000 years ago, someone looked at a goat and thought, I wonder what that tastes like. The problem is, they almost certainly got sick. Most early humans were lactose intolerant because that was the default. That was normal. Tolerance was the mutation. So the first few thousand years of humans keeping dairy animals must have been miserable. You've got a nutritious liquid coming out of this animal every single day, and drinking it wrecks your stomach. That's the kind of problem that drives invention. And that's probably exactly how cheese was discovered. Nobody sat down and engineered it. The most widely accepted theory is that someone stored milk in a bag made from an animal's stomach, probably a calf's stomach, because that's what you had. The enzyme still lining that stomach, particularly one called rennet, curdled the milk during a long walk or a hot afternoon. When they opened the bag, the liquid had separated into curds and whey. The curds were solid, tangy, and here's the important part, they had almost no lactose. Fermentation had eaten it. A person who couldn't drink milk without cramping could eat this new thing just fine. Cheese wasn't a luxury, it was a workaround. It was the only way most humans on the planet could access dairy nutrition without their own bodies fighting them. And that's not just a theory. In 2018, researchers extracted proteins from the dental plaque of Bronze Age skeletons in Europe and found direct evidence of milk consumption in populations that were still largely lactose intolerant. They were eating cheese and yogurt, not drinking milk. The processing came first. The genetic tolerance came later, slowly spreading through populations over thousands of years, because the people who could tolerate dairy had a caloric advantage and were more likely to survive. Cheese didn't adapt to humans. Humans adapted to cheese. Now that Polish pottery from 7,500 years ago was the oldest confirmed physical evidence of cheese making for a while. But the timeline keeps getting pushed back. In the Sahara Desert, which wasn't always a desert, rock art dating to around 5000 BC shows herders with cattle and what appears to be milk processing. Chemical analysis of pottery from the same region found dairy fats baked into the clay. People were making cheese in a green Sahara before it turned to sand. The desert literally dried up around them, and the cheese making continued anyway, because once you figure out how to preserve calories like that, you don't stop. The Sumerians, one of the earliest civilizations, had at least 20 different words for cheese. 20. These people were barely past the invention of writing, and they needed 20 words to describe all the varieties they were making. A carved frieze from a temple at Ur, dating to about 2500 BC, shows a full dairy production line. Workers milking cows, straining curds, storing the finished product. This wasn't some household trick. It was an industry 4,500 years ago. And the Egyptians were right there with them. In 2018, archaeologists opened a set of broken jars inside a 3,200-year-old tomb at Saqqara and found a solidified white mass. They tested it. It was cheese, the oldest actual chunk of cheese ever found. It had been sitting in a tomb for over 3 millennia, left as an offering for the dead. Someone loved this guy enough to make sure he had cheese in the afterlife. But they also found something else in that sample. Brucella melitensis, a bacterium that causes brucellosis, a potentially fatal disease you get from unpasteurized dairy. The cheese that was supposed to nourish him in the next world might have been what helped send him there. But here's what most people don't realize. The ancient world didn't eat cheese the way you're imagining. There were no golden aged wheels or anything like what you'd see in a European cheese shop. Most ancient cheese was soft, white, crumbly, and sour. Think somewhere between cottage cheese and feta, hard-aged cheese, the kind that could survive long journeys and last through winter, that came later, and it changed everything. The Romans figured this out. Roman legions carried a cheese called caseus in their rations because it was dense, caloric, and didn't spoil on a forced march. A soldier could carry enough cheese to sustain himself for days. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, catalogued cheeses from across the empire, from the smoky varieties made in the Alps to a cheese from a region in what's now France that he said was the finest in Rome. The Romans weren't just eating cheese. They were ranking it, reviewing it, arguing about which province made the best one. 2,000 years ago, people were already being snobs about cheese. If you're enjoying this, just hit subscribe. That's all I ask. And it wasn't just Europe. On the Central Asian steppe, nomadic herders were making a hard, dried cheese called kurut by pressing fermented milk into dense balls and letting them dry in the sun and wind. Kurut could last for years. Genghis Khan's armies carried it across half of Asia. A Mongol rider could dissolve a piece in water while riding and have a full meal without ever stopping his horse. Cheese was military technology. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a different tradition was forming. Bedouin herders had been making a strained yogurt cheese called jamed for centuries, preserved so hard it could be stored indefinitely in dry climates. When you needed it, you'd reconstitute it with water. It was a battery. You charged it with milk and pulled energy out of it months later. But the real revolution happened in the monasteries. During the Middle Ages, European monks turned cheesemaking into something closer to science. They had the one thing no one else did: time. Monks could experiment with aging, with mold, with bacteria, and they could wait years to see the result. Almost every famous European cheese you can name traces back to a monastery. The Benedictines developed what became several major French varieties. Monks in the Alps created the precursors to Gruyere and Emmental. Parmigiano Reggiano, one of the most regulated foods on earth today, originated in Benedictine and Cistercian monasteries in Italy around the 13th century. These monks figured out that if you cooked the curd just right and aged the wheat for years, you got something that was nutritionally dense, nearly indestructible, and tasted better the longer you waited. Monasteries became the original cheese factories, and some of them still produce cheese today using methods that haven't changed in 800 years. And then there's the mold. Somebody at some point looked at a piece of cheese that had gone blue-green with fungus and instead of throwing it away, took a bite and liked it. Roquefort, one of the oldest named cheeses in the world, has been made in the caves of southern France for at least 1,000 years. The legend says a shepherd left his lunch of bread and sheep's milk cheese in a cave, got distracted chasing a girl, came back weeks later, and found the cheese had been transformed by the cave's natural penicillium mold. That story is almost certainly made up. But the cheese is real, and the caves are still in use, and the mold that grows in them is still the same mold that was there a millennium ago. The conditions are so specific that French law protects those caves by name. Now here's the part that puts it all in perspective. For most of human history, cheese was local. Every village, every valley, every monastery made its own variety based on what animals they had, what bacteria lived in their environment, and what the climate allowed. A cheese from one mountain tasted different from a cheese made 10 miles away because the grass was different, the water was different, the air carried different microbes. There were thousands of unique cheeses across the world, and most of them existed nowhere else. That started to change around the 1850s when a man named Jesse Williams opened the first cheese factory in Oneida County, New York. Instead of every farm making its own cheese, Williams collected milk from neighboring farms and processed it all in one place. It was efficient, it was consistent, and it was the beginning of the end for variety. Within a few decades, factory cheese had taken over the American market. By the early 1900s, James L. Kraft figured out how to pasteurize and process cheese so it could be shipped anywhere without refrigeration. That's how you got Kraft Singles. A food that started as a spontaneous accident in a calf's stomach bag 10,000 years ago had been engineered into a plastic-wrapped square that technically didn't even qualify as cheese anymore. The FDA made Kraft call it pasteurized prepared cheese product because legally it wasn't cheese. But here's the thing. Despite all the industrialization, the old ways never fully died. In the mountains of Switzerland, there are still herders who carry copper kettles up to alpine pastures every summer and make cheese over open fires exactly the way their ancestors did centuries ago. In Sardinia, families still produce cashew marzu, a cheese deliberately infested with live insect larvae that break down the fats and make the texture almost liquid. It's technically illegal under EU food safety laws. People eat it anyway. In Mongolia, herders still make kurut the same way they did when Genghis Khan was alive. Cheese has been with humans for somewhere around 8,000 to 10,000 years. maybe longer. Before writing, before bronze, before anyone built a city. It started because a body that couldn't handle milk needed a workaround, and someone was desperate or curious enough to eat the weird solid chunks that formed inside a stomach skin bag on a hot day. And from that one accident came something that fed armies, sustained monasteries, survived inside tombs, crossed deserts on horseback, and outlasted every empire that ever tried to claim it. That 3,200-year-old lump in the Egyptian tomb wasn't beautiful. It wasn't aged or refined, but someone made it, wrapped it, and placed it next to a body they were sending into eternity, because they believed wherever he was going, he'd want cheese when he got there. 10,000 years, and we still haven't found a good reason to argue with that.